Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. This is Jennifer Romano Bergstrom, President of the User Experience Professionals Association, the UXPA. Really excited to bring you our first webinar of 2017. Last year, we had a very successful webinar program, and I'm very excited to get it going again this year. This year, we will be doing our monthly webinar program, and we're also going to be introducing webinars in other languages. So stay tuned for that. Next month, we'll have our first webinar in Spanish, and that will be by Claudia Gutierrez. We'll have information on our website shortly. And because you're attending this webinar, you'll also now, if you're not already, you'll also be a part of our mailing list. So you will be getting more information about our upcoming webinars and events. For those of you that don't know much about the UXPA, or even for those of you who do, we really work hard to bring UX resources, educational resources, to UX professionals and students. And while we've been, doing that for years, we're really working hard to bring you more in 2017. So stay tuned for lots of wonderful things that we have coming your way. Also, keep an eye out for more information about our annual conference. It's taking place this year in Toronto, June 5th through the 8th. So hope to see you all out there. Registration will be open shortly. I'm proud to announce that our webinar speaker today is Rajesh Kalidindi. Rajesh is also on the UXPA Board of Directors. He's our Director of Web Content and Strategy, working hard to make sure that conference registration website and our conference website, that everything works really well, and also our main website. So you will be seeing improvements to our website this year as well. Of course, that's just a volunteer thing that Rajesh does for us, for the organization, and for our members. But in addition to that, Rajesh is a user experience professional at Microsoft with a special interest in accessibility. Accessibility is so important, and oftentimes we are not paying as much attention to it as we should be. So I'm really excited to bring you this webinar today. Rajesh has over 20 years of experience in the user experience field, delivering better user experiences in consumer and in enterprise domains. And he does this by observing people's needs, desires, and behaviors, and then merging these observations into business goals. Rajesh lives in Seattle. As I mentioned, he works at Microsoft, and he's also, in addition to being a board member on the UXPA International, he's also a founding member of the UXPA Seattle chapter. So very, very involved in UXPA. Thank you so much, Rajesh. I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. User experience. I'm preparing for going to a conference next month. I'm very excited about that. 2 weeks back, I was about to register for that conference. I have searched a little bit about the sessions that I want to go, and I went to the registration site. I have selected all my sessions I wanted to go, and I started entering my registration information, my personal information, billing, credit card, etc., all the information. That is when one of my colleagues knocked the door in my office room. He wanted to talk about very important things, so we chatted about 30 minutes, and then he left my office. Then I came back to the registration site where I was about to complete. Guess what? I saw the screen. All the work what I have done is gone. The system has some time limit. If that particular website might have thought about accessibility, they would have given option to either save my information or extend my time limits. Because one of the accessibility guideline is to provide those kind of options in the user experiences. So when we think about user experience, we normally do not consider accessibility. As Jen mentioned, for the last 2 decades, my personal mantra is to hide all the complexities and bring a simple experiences on the screen.
Rajesh,
Out of
sorry. Rajesh, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry. I just want to make sure we're seeing the right thing. So we're still seeing the UXPA slide?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
How about now?
Nope. Still seeing the UXPA slide.
Let me stop the sharing and then share again. Do you see my desktop now?
Nope. Oh, okay. So now it stopped sharing.
Okay, so now let me share my screen again.
And now I see your desktop.
Okay. Thanks for
And
notifying that.
sure, sure. Now it's okay, perfect. Now it looks like it's going through. Now it's your title slide.
Okay, good.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Speaking about that experience, I have spent more than 8 years on creating inclusive experiences out of my 2 decades of creating the digital experiences, user experiences. Today, I'm going to share some of my experiences with you. After this webinar, I want you to create experiences for everyone, not excluding certain people. I am planning to share a landscape of what is accessibility means, population, and economics of people with disabilities, and bring to the design principles and some of the best practices as a user experience professionals we can do to enable experiences for everyone. Let's look at the population. When we create experiences with technology, we often generate, validate ideas based on what we know. We strive to make experiences that solve needs, work well with human body, and improve lives. But here is a problem. If we use our own abilities and biases as a starting point, we end up with digital experiences designed for people of specific gender, age, language, or a physical ability. When it comes to people, there is no such thing as normal. The interactions we design with technology depend heavily on what we can see, hear, say, and touch. Assuming all those senses and abilities are fully enabled all the times creates potential to ignore much of the range of humanity. When we talk about humanity, there are almost 7.5 billion people on the earth. If we create experiences with our own biases, we exclude 15% of the world population with disabilities. World Health Organization has shared their statistics facts in November last year that 15% of the world population have some form of declared disability. In 1980, World Health Organization has defined the disability as personal health condition. But today, the same organization is defining the disability as mismatched human interactions. Disability is not just a health problem. It is a complex phenomena reflecting the interaction between features of a person's body and features of the society in which we live today. I'll take an example. Imagine that you are holding your laptop bag or a purse with one hand and a coffee mug with another hand, and you are entering into the room, the door is closed. How do you open? At that time, you could be situationally disabled. Imagine one more scenario where you are in a loud crowd. You can't hear well. You may not have a physical disability, but at that situation, you are situationally disabled because you are not able to hear the other person what he is sharing with you. As a designers, it is our responsibilities to know how our designs affect these interactions and create mismatches. Let's look at the technology landscape. The International Telecommunication Union has shared in 2016 June that 95% of world population has access to mobile cellular network. What does that mean? For us, when we create experiences, we have a potential to impact with our experiences almost 95% of the world population. Why does it matter to us? Because it brings the economics to us. It is the business. It is the people with disabilities almost as an emerging market the size of the China. With an estimated population almost more than 1.5 billion people with disabilities, they have a potential business impact of $8 trillion in the annual disposable income. As experienced professionals, do we want to lose that business? I don't think so. You may be thinking that, okay, this is the world population and this is world economics. Most of us today who joined, I assume that we live in United States. Let's look at the economics in United States itself. There are 77 million people in United States between the ages of 48 and 66, which they have a spending power of over $2 trillion. Again, this is a huge potential that our experiences will also impact the economics of it. Okay, I said enough about the population and economics. Now, I would like to bring a perspective of how people with disabilities interact with our digital experiences. When people with disabilities, they may interact using a technology called assistive technologies. We may not assume that everybody will be able to directly touch our screens, interact with our screens with the keyboard or a mouse, or they may hear. Those people who has a physical disability, they rely on some sort of a device or a software between our experiences and their interaction. Some examples could be of the assistive technologies are screen readers. The content on the screen, the software will read out for the users so that the people who cannot see the screens, they can interact with these experiences. There are a lot of assistive technologies out there in the market. I'm going to talk about very few of them, but you can search for them, how these assistive technologies are used by people with disabilities. I talked about screen reader. There are some people who might rely on magnifying the screens. Some people may talk to the system, speech recognition software, like a dragon. Maybe some people are having a different type of mouse, or maybe they are using a different type of keyboards, the physical devices. When we create a digital experiences, we need to have a perspective of how people with disabilities might interact with our experiences. They may rely on assistive technologies. When we create experiences, we need to ensure our experiences are reaching to the end user through these assistive technologies. Now, when we need to create experiences, how we can go about it? There are a lot of standards out there. You might have heard about accessibility guidelines and some other industry standards as well, and some of the governments has their own standards. I'm not going to go into the deep of those standards, but I do want to bring a perspective on some of the principles, directly how they are connected to create experiences. I have a comparison of two principles, accessibility principles and universal design principles. If you look at them, either accessibility principles or universal design principles, they both talk about creating inclusive experiences. These accessibility principles offer designers an approach to meeting all user goals. On the other side, the universal design principles also starts from the premises that there is no typical or average or normal user. Rather, there is a basic understanding that the user context will vary widely based on circumstances. With a variance as the norm, the principles support a design process that makes sure that any needs arising from differences are met by the design. Before I go into the digital experiences, let me show you how are some of these principles we may benefit even with non-digital experiences as well. This is an adjustable table height. Who don't like this kind of experience? This might have designed keeping in the mind of accessibility, but everybody would love, in my office, most of us would love to have this kind of flexibility to adjust their height. I assume that you would love this kind of flexibility as well. Another example, you might be thinking that the curbs are useful for wheelchairs, the people who are navigating the world through in the wheelchairs. But guess what? If you keep in mind accessibility, it will enable diverse abilities. Here I'm showing one example where a stroller can benefit from it. Imagine yourself when you're carrying your luggage, when you go into the train. Of course, even though you are not in the wheelchair, you will benefit from it. Another quick example, a physical example. I love IKEA, the way they give instructions to assemble furniture. Very simple, intuitive manual, not a big manual, not a lot of text. With a simple illustrations, they will help you to assemble some of the furniture, even though it is a physically challenging to assemble, but the way they give the experience through the simple and intuitive illustrations. These are some of the examples I have talked so far. Now, I'm going to move into how these principles will help us to create digital experiences. Those of you know about user-centered design, you know that the experiences starts from the users. You want to understand who are your users. Let me ask you, how many times when you do the study, you have talked to a person with a disability, or at least a person who is aged above 60? It is a very often we see, in my experience with my colleagues who does a lot of usability studies, when they pick up the user profiles for their studies, they don't consider people with disabilities. That is one of the best practice today. I would like to inform to you that when you're creating an experience, when you're trying to start observing your users, when you try to do your usability studies or the research, think about the population I just shared with you, the economics I have shared with you. That will help you to focus on not just recruiting some users who has normal abilities. You may be asking a question that, where can I find these people? How can I include them in my studies? Most of the cities have non-profit organizations, and those organizations serve people with various disabilities. They would love to find volunteers for your studies. If you haven't tried that, next time when you're doing a study, I would encourage you to reach out to them so that you have your participants for your studies. Or talk to a person who is more than 60 years or 50 years. Then you will learn a lot by observing them, how they use the technology. Okay, you have included some of these people, and how do you make few tweaks in your user research practices? Let me tell you, a few years back when I started doing studies with people with disabilities, my experience. We have done all the prep work, we have recruited, and we were waiting for the person to come into our study lab. And the person has come into the lab, and we have given a scenario for the person to perform with our laptop. Guess what? The person relies on an assistive technology which was missing in the laptop we were using for the usability study. The key here is to, when we are doing studies with people with disabilities, don't assume that they will be able to interact with your own settings, your own laptops, or your own devices. Be prepared to test with the users within their environment with their own assistive technologies. Most of the time, our prototype software does not work with the native assistive technologies such as screen readers, Dragon software, which people speak to it. Some of those prototypes we developed does not work. Then go back to the old school way of doing the studies. bring the paper and magnifying glass, or bring a flashcards, big flashcards, where you will be the audio describer for the user, so that you will be able to get the feedback from the users. But if you are very serious about making sure these experiences are inclusive, what I would suggest you to create your prototypes also works with the assistive technologies. That way, you don't need to be an audio describer. You can focus on observing that user, how they might use your experiences that you are about to create. There are a couple of other tips I will give you before I go into the design experiences, creating the design. When you're scheduling with people with disabilities for your studies, be flexible. They might take some more time than your regular scheduled time. And if you are inviting them into your buildings, your offices, or your um, physical labs, then make sure your labs and your offices have certain accommodations, maybe wheelchair, or maybe user friendly for everyone who can come in and participate in your studies. I hope some of these tips are useful for you when you do these studies. And if you have any questions, get ready with those. Towards end of the session, I'm going to take up a few questions. Now, I'm going to talk about how we can tweak our design practices to create inclusive experiences. Let me start with layouts. In the modern design phenomena, there are a lot of variances in the layouts we see here. But what I would encourage you to do is make sure the layout is flexible. When you make sure that layout is flexible, it will accommodate the users their own settings. This may be useful for your other various devices as well. If your layout is flexible enough, this can be usable. That layout can be usable in the laptop or in the mobile or small device or bigger, larger device or anything like that. And also when you lay out the content on the page, very often I see that there is a missing heading structure. As a designers, they may not doing this intentionally, but I would say not knowing that how people use the experiences, they might doing these mistakes. Today, I'm bringing some of these small tweaks, some of these small tips where impacts in a larger way of the using these experiences. When we have a content on a big page, make sure that when you're chunking your content on the page, have a proper heading structure. You might have heard about H1s, H2s, H3s as a standard. But when you're handing off this design to the developer, or in fact, you are the developer who is taking the design, this is a very simple way of defining the heading structure, often had a bad impact on end users. Sometimes, because of the beauty of the design, we may place the content in a different places that might cause a way of interacting with the screen logically. What I'm saying here is that when you place your content, ensure that it is in a logical order so that those people who rely on the assistive technologies, they can get the same experience as anybody else. Simplify the layout as much as possible and keep the navigational schemes as consistent as possible. Some places I have seen, speaking on the navigation, sometimes I see that navigating from one page to another page, sometimes we use links, sometimes we use the buttons. This kind of behavior in our designs will confuse people who rely on assistive technologies, which I mentioned earlier. You may be thinking that everybody can see your screens and can understand this is a button or this is a link. But having a consistent way of navigation using a proper standards, using links for navigating, and leave those buttons to submit the data to the systems will enhance the experiences. And I also see that sometimes the navigation structure is hierarchical, which is very good. But if you have endless levels of the hierarchy in the navigation, 3 levels, 4 levels, 5 levels of the submenus, it is going to create a frustration, not just with people with disabilities, it also a bad usability practice. And also, I would like to remind us that when people navigate our experiences, not everybody will be able to navigate through the mouse. Imagine if the person is not using the mouse and if just using the keyboard. You need to let help user to understand which particular interactive element they are using at that point. That we call in accessibility domain as a visual focus indicator, the dotted line around the interactive element when people use with navigates the systems with a keyboard, it shows that where the focus is. It is very important for us to know as a, experienced professionals when we design screens to give an indication where the particular focus is on the design. That way, it could be inclusive, not just creating the experience for only targeted for mouse users. Now, I'll talk about color. As a design professionals, we all love the color, how we use in our systems. In my status reports, one day what happened, when I shared my status report with one of our VPs in my company, I have shown the status report red, green, and yellow. And my vice president could not consume that data because he's a colorblind. I didn't know that. I have assumed that red, green, yellow is very easy to resonate with the statuses. How many times you have seen in the digital experiences where you have error messages which says errors are in red color, or something like you fix the errors in the red color fields? There we are making an assumption that every individual can see the color the way we think red is. With the aging population, with the variances of personal situations or abilities, everyone cannot consume the color. What you think red is not red for everybody. It is a very important when we think about using the color, we should not rely exclusively on color to convey the message. I'm not asking you to change all of your colors to black and white. You may use the color, but you cannot rely on exclusively using the color to convey the message. You need to have an alternative method of conveying that information to the end users. Not just the color usage. In the content, in the text color also, I see that a very bad contrast in so many designs. Even in our website, UXPA website, also we have that that kind of experience. We are trying to change that, but it is very often that we change very light color text on the light color background, or sometimes we use dark color text on the dark color background. Not having enough text contrast, all people may not able to read the content what we are presenting to them. So next, I'm going to talk about forms. When we talk about the user interface with the digital systems, the controls we use in our UI is very important, and how they are designed and how they are coded. Here, if you are a designer, you may be designing this, but you have to ensure when you are transferring this design to a developer, some of these things you need to inform the developer. Do not assume that the developer is having knowledge of all the standards and they code properly, meet the accessibility guidelines, and so that everybody can use. That's an assumption. What I'm bringing here is some of a combination responsibility between the designers and developers. How we create forms, the user interfaces, the interactive elements in our UI, and will impact the end users. I briefly talked about buttons and links earlier, a few minutes back. Very often, when the designer gives a link, but when we use that solution with the assistive technology such as a screen reader, many times I hear that link as a button. That means you as a designer might have designed as a link, but the developer has coded as a button. How does it matter? Yes, it matters when you're using the screen reader, when you rely on that assistive technology. Because that assistive technology is designed and developed based on the standards, and links are used for the navigating from one page to another page. Button is used to something critical than submitting to the system. It is not just designing buttons and links. It is also important to ensure our developers understand how they code based on these principles, the accessibility principles I just mentioned about. And I see there are a lot of custom controls. It looks like a drop down, but it does not behave like a drop down. When we are customizing these controls, it could be checkboxes, it could be radio buttons, it could be multi-select drop-downs or a single selection drop-downs. When we customize, it is a very important that we have to ensure it is following the proper design patterns. For example, checkbox, sometimes it doesn't work with my spacebar on the keyboard, or it doesn't work with the enter key on the keyboard, because that particular developer or a designer who ever did that, they have made an assumption that they use a mouse, the user uses the mouse. So it is not just handing off the design with these elements. It is important for us to work with the developers to ensure the way we have placed these form controls are also meeting the standards, so that it is giving an inclusive experience for everyone. And also sometimes I see how the error messages are displayed within our forms. In my story earlier, I talked about registering the conference site. In that site, there was an error message saying that go fix all the fields shows in red color in the form. Because of that kind of message, as some people may not able to see red, but more importantly, if you cannot see the red color, how do you know which controls has errors? In order to prevent that kind of experience, think about placing your error messages in context of the field, in context of the control which has an error. That is beneficial not for people with low vision. It is also beneficial for everyone who can directly understand, oh, this is the control I need to fix. And also some people may use the screens with the magnifiers. Then if it is a magnifier, then they may need to scroll in various places of the screen to find out where is this error. If you place that error message close to the control, then it will be easy for not just for people who rely on the assistive technologies, it is easy for everyone. Next, I would like to talk about text. Sometimes I have seen designers convert the text blocks into images as a GIF file or JPEGs and including on the screens. The people who rely on the assistive technologies cannot understand what is in this image unless you are describing everything in the image as an alt tag. So the best practice for us to, as much as possible, use the true text in our designs. It is not just with the assistive technologies. It is also easy to load faster, easy to translate. There are a lot of other benefits. And also, when you are zooming the page, it is easy when you have a true text on the page. Some people may rely on using the text size scaling up to 200% or 300% or 400% because of their needs. So what I would encourage you to think about how the screens, the text you are putting on your screens can be accommodating with the larger percentage of the zoom settings. And I also see that sometimes the font sizes we use small. I'm glad that most of our devices are touch screens these days and we can zoom in. But sometimes if you do not use the text as a true text, then the scaling does not work. Even though there is a zooming technology, but still it is very important to have a minimum 10 plus point font size in our designs. Intentionally, we may not do this mistake. The one I'm going to say now is all caps. Sometimes I see that headings are all caps. There are a lot of studies have done on this, and the research shows that it reduces the reading speed, all caps, for the person who can see. And even the person who relies on the assistive technologies also, it is a problem because the assistive technologies may not understand properly all caps text. So next time when you're designing your headings with all caps, think twice. Next, I would like to talk about animations and videos. I see that in very common in many websites and mobile experiences that automatically some of the animation loads as soon as you launch the page. It is a very difficult for people using the assistive technologies to understand what had happened on the page if you just start the page with the animation or some video. What I would suggest is when you want to display animations or videos in your content, in your digital experiences, give the control to the end user. When to start that animation, If there is a continuous animation is there, it is a very important to have a permanent pause or a stop option, because when the content is consistently moving on the screens, it is very hard to focus on the tasks what the user is going to perform. So it is very critical for us to provide an option to stop that animation, or maybe having a permanent pause, not just having the pause for 5 seconds. Because after 5 seconds and 10 seconds, again, the animation starts, the user will distract from the task. Maybe you have a critical shopping experience where your animation is kind of annoying that person and not buying from your website or from your experience. Then, closed captions. You may think that a closed captions is for somebody who cannot hear, but let me tell you, let me ask you to imagine that you are in a busy room, a loud room in your own home. Maybe the children are playing or somebody else is talking. When there is a video is playing, if you have the closed captions, you don't need to disturb your family members or your children. They can play on their own, and still you can consume that video using the closed captions. This is another example that when you keep accessibility in mind, it will help everyone. Next, I'm going to talk about content management systems. In our digital experiences, sometimes there are some systems which export the content into our screens. All the important principles I have talked so far, the guidelines I have talked so far, which also applicable to the content management systems when they generate the content on our screens. Make sure the heading structure is properly coming from your CMS. Make sure the paragraph tags are coming properly. Link tags are coming properly. And speaking on the links, one important thing I haven't mentioned till now, when you have a heavy content on your pages, you might see more or click here 10 times or 20 times on a screen. That means you have made an assumption that visually the click more or some other standard text visually align with the paragraph. But if the person is using the screen reader and listing all the links in a screen reader dialog, then they may not know which link is associated with which content. So the best practice is that you have a descriptive links instead of a generic link which says click here or learn more or something like generic links you need to avoid. And I have touched upon this particular topic in my previous conversations here in the last few minutes, that everyone may not have the standard setting that we can think of. So we need to ensure, or we need to test when we're testing with the users, or when we test our own, doing the evaluations, different settings, such as having a different zoom settings in your browsers. Every device comes with the high contrast mode. It could be a laptop, or it could be a desktop, or it could be a mobile device. Most of them has high contrast settings. You go find out in your settings, in your devices, you will find the high contrast. This is a very simple test you can do. Turn on the high contrast and see the content. The important information, what you want your users to use, is that information consumable, usable in that high contrast settings. You could find a lot of other settings in your devices under accessibility domain, in your phones or in your desktops. Go find out, change those settings, and turn on your designs and experience yourself how these experiences will um, exclude some of the users if your system is not working, if your experience is not working with these native settings. So it is very important for us to respect the user settings. Next, the last one I want to talk about, don't think that every person touches your screen or every person uses the mouse, every person uses the keyboard. Think about the person who cannot see, who cannot hear, who cannot touch. How would they interact with your experience? Do you have an alternative method, input method, to interact with your device? This will enable you to think about how you can create inclusive experiences. Now, we have 8 minutes left, and I would like to spend some time on the question and answers. Before that, I would like to thank you today for attending this webinar. I have talked about importance of the accessibility, the trends of population, technology trends, the design principles, the best practices we as an experienced professionals, how we can tweak a little bit in our practices and create inclusive experiences. I hope, not I hope, I want you to create experiences for everyone, not excluding certain people. The picture I'm sharing here resonates with me that the accessibility could be essential for some, but it is useful for all. With that, I think you practice these small tweaks in your everyday job and create inclusive experiences. With that, I'm going to open for question and answers.
Thank you so much, Rajesh. That was really wonderful. We do have some questions here, so let me quickly go through them. One just kind of overarching one is people are very interested in seeing some examples. Would you be able to, I know this is recorded, we'll be sharing it on our site. Would you also be able to pull together some examples that we can share with our attendees?
Sure, absolutely. I did not want to offend. These examples are available all over on the web. But definitely, if people are interested, I can pull some examples and include in the recording or in my deck.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great. I think for things like one place that I was thinking would be helpful was like when you were talking about the headers. Like I know
Mhm.
what that looks like from prior accessibility evaluations that I've been a part of, but for people who haven't seen that before or not familiar, I think just a simple visual without even using like a bad site, because I know you don't want to offend, but just some super high level examples might be helpful.
Sure, I can do that.
All
Thanks for
right,
that
cool.
suggestion.
Yeah, um, no problem. Okay, so we have a couple questions about prototyping tools. Do you have certain prototyping tools that you recommend that allow prototypes to be used with screen readers? Let me
Um,
see what else around Actually, go ahead. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, any other
all
tools to create prototypes that could be used, tools that you recommend to create prototypes that can be used with assistive technologies?
I have tried at least 4 or 5 prototyping software like Blasamic and other prototyping softwares. Those did not have any accessibility accommodations. So very unfortunate that there is no, I haven't come across a single prototype software that accommodates the accessibility. That is why I encourage you create a prototype, including the accessibility tags in your prototypes itself so that you can test with it. But if somebody has an idea after this session, please let me know. In my next session, I will include that.
Okay. Great. What about, let's see. Okay, how quickly are assistive technologies changing? And do you have a recommendation for a good way to keep up with the landscape of assistive tech that most impacts the experience of users with disabilities?
Very good question. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to explain this. As the people with disabilities needs are arising, the assistive technologies are also um, expanding their range. And some of the assistive technologies also coming inbuilt in a native settings in our devices. Um, there are free assistive technologies available. For example, the screen reader. There is a screen reader called NVDA from NV Access, which is a free screen reader available, open source. If you would like to donate, you can. And every major operating system, they incorporate screen readers and high contrast settings. You can use those free resources to test with your test your experiences. I'm seeing that there is a lot of development is happening in the last couple of years. All the technology companies are either improving their native settings in their systems, or coming up with the special screen readers. Like JAWS is one of the very well-known screen reader in the industry from Freedom Scientific, and a lot of other companies also investing in creating some of the assistive technologies. And some companies are thinking that this is not a separate software, or embedding into into their devices. One example I can say, the phone anti-glare, it could be considered as accessibility setting. But guess what? If you go into the daylight, a bright light outside, still you can consume because of that the native setting in the mobile phones. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Um, you mentioned that animations are a problem. Does this include animations like sliding out a submenu or animating a transition from a list page to the detail page of a single list item? Or
No,
is this more like video type animations?
yeah. I'm talking about carousels, continuous transition of the images on the pages, not the transition, because the transition is a fraction of seconds is fine, but if there is any movement beyond 5 seconds or 10 seconds, it could be a problem for focusing on the core tasks within the experiences, um, not on the transitions.
Okay. We have some questions here about the prototypes, but I'm curious, can you wait until something is fully programmed to do accessibility testing, or do you really recommend, thinking about it and making sure something is accessible throughout development? Is it the type of thing that you can wait until the end, like before you launch?
Not the before you launch. It has to be from the beginning, as you're converting your design screens into prototype. Even though your prototype software is not including the accessibility, you need to extra invest in creating the prototypes, keeping accessibility in mind. Because you know what happens if you do the accessibility from the beginning, from the prototype stage, you will save a lot of time and money. Once you do the accessibility as a last sprint before launch, you need to make a structural changes to accommodate accessibility. For example, heading structure we talked about. If you need to change the heading structure, that is a kind of a fundamental structure in your layout, but you take only 5 minutes or 10 minutes when you start doing it. But if you wait until the end, it is going to be very expensive from a time and money wise. What I would suggest is from the beginning, from the design phase into the prototype and including the usability testings, ensure in every step you have included accessibility guidelines so that it will be easy and less expensive.
Hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we are out of time. It is 9 o'clock out here on the Pacific Coast on the dot. There are some questions that we didn't get to. So, Rajesh, if you have some extra time, you might just want to, take a look at those questions and see if maybe we can write a blog post or something like that to address the questions. And for everybody who's attended, you will be getting a link to the recording, and Rajesh will send some examples of some of the principles that he discussed here. So thank you
Sure.
so much, Rajesh, for presenting. This was really, really great. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. I know accessibility is a very vast topic. It is very hard to cover in one hour. So feel free to reach out to me, and I will do my best to respond to all the questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.